constrain this. We need to have enough constraints that we have some assurance that we're moving in the right direction, but we don't want to bind ourselves where we can't implement projects that make sense in the future because we've been so narrow and so specific in our basin plan amendment and our nitrogen management plan. So there's this dichotomy of how much detail and at what point do you put that in there. And my feeling is that we have to have some bounds on this and make sure we're heading in the right direction, but there's going to be some uncertainty. There's going to be uncertainty for the disadvantaged communities and as well as for agriculture. If I brought up probably most of the folks I represent and told them this grand bargain that we're talking about, they're equally as uncertain about what we're talking about. And we're way out on a limb here of talking about this bargain. But I think we're better off having some flexibility, and we're going to have to put some faith in the regional board and the folks who are on that board to make those decisions that are necessary when these SNMPs and the basin plan gets implemented in real world situations, that they make the right choices, that they deal with anti-degradation appropriately, and that they use the tools to the maximum benefit of the people of the state. So we're going to have to count on good decision makers at the regional board and the oversight at the state board. Because if we try and bound this too tightly and dictate exactly what's going to happen, we're going to tie our hands just like we're sort of dealing with right now. There'll be projects that we want to implement that make sense to the disadvantaged communities, that make sense to the regulated community, that just aren't allowed. So it's that dichotomy between flexibility.
Understood.
And
it's about getting a little closer and
Yeah,
finding
yeah,
the
exactly.
sweet spot. Because going to the other extreme, asking people to rely on us or a regional board to trust, there's no historic reason why we should.
So
Speaking
you're
as someone
preaching
who
to the
used to
choir
be
here.
an
Yeah.
advocate, and people feel
yeah.
that, and it has nothing to do with the current people, it's just the current people may not be there.
Exactly.
And sometimes there's more political pressure than other. So we're moving into this also different paradigm of this more integrated collaborative conversation trying to solve a problem versus just implementing rules as they've always been. So your point taken, finding that sweet spot between the two is
Exactly. That's what we have to do, and that's what we need to work on. And there were some handouts at some of the recent meetings that sort of lays that out, and trying to figure out exactly what do we need, what bounds do we need to put on this so people can feel comfortable moving forward. And we're trying to explore that with Laurel and with Phoebe and with Jennifer and other folks as well as the agricultural folks and the
Right.
POTWs, and figuring out what are the proper bounds. And that's the hard work that we're going to be working on here in the next few months.
And I recommend that you put in as many milestone dates as possible, because this is in Region 8. They laid out what was going to happen, and various agencies committed to various and sundry things, and then and to some extent it was opportunistic when there was going to be bond money or whatever. But people, they identified where they were going to put desalters, and they identified by when they would have those desalters in place. That's the critical piece, because they missed a deadline. And it went by, for months. And then the regional board had to step up, and did, in this case, and find the agency that missed that deadline. And so that's super, super important, that everyone can see these deadlines and can, everyone wants to meet the deadlines that they set for themselves, but if they miss them, there will be consequences. And I think that for Region 8, that I think that gave credibility to the region, and it certainly moved it focused the attention of some of the regulated community, because they thought, whoa, we got to get on top of this one really fast, and they did, and now things are back to normal, and we're moving along. But deadlines, visible deadlines, not just rhetoric, or not just even commitment in general, isn't going to be enough. I think real deadlines are going to be important.
My day is complete. Board Member Moore spoke about performance measures, and the Vice Chair spoke about deadlines. I'm a happy person.
Yeah, really. We live to make you happy, Tam.
Well, hopefully next year, that Laurel and or Phoebe will be sitting here as opposed to we'll be making a
Right.
joint presentation.
That would be
my
delightful.
goal
That would be
in
great.
this process, so that, because they are equal members of this stakeholder process, and we see their concerns and try and address them and try and understand them. So we need to communicate better and make sure we integrate those and balance those things.
Great, thank you. I think with your two permission, I'm going to close on that because we have a number of items. And I'm going to also ask my colleagues if I can just barrel through so that we can have a lunch hour. Okay. And we'll try to go quickly because we're going to have a long afternoon on a very important topic. And we need to be nourished and hydrated as best we can. Thank you all very, very much. Really. All right, Mr. Howard, item number 6. I know we're spending a fair amount of the afternoon on this, so perhaps just as your plan about the other stuff.
Update with John O'Hagan.
Great.
Good morning. Wait till they put up my PowerPoint. I'm going to give you a brief update on for the board's improvement. I thought I would start with the activities that are in progress right now that the division is working on. First off, we're improving the drought website.
That's great.
We're trying to make the information more easily accessible so that the public can get to items through tabular type format.
Good.
We're also working on the dry year report. That's due at the end of January.
And can you just say for a minute again for the people listening what that is? Because the title's not self-explanatory.
It was a report that we were looking back on what we did and how to improve our work for the drought as required by the board's regulations, and we're trying to improve how we do things and how what information that we can provide to the public so that the system works better.
I appreciate all the time you've spent meeting with stakeholders and the massive binder of comments that you've gotten.
Yes. The next thing is petitions for temporary urgency changes and transfers. We are now getting those in for renewals for temporary urgency changes, so we have 2 that will be issued this week. We are also performing a state...
What are those 2? You said there's 2. You could mention who.
Oh, yeah.
would receive.
One would be the City of Thousand Oaks, which is a renewal of a temporary urgency change, and then a Department of Water Resource transfer that involves an exchange of water with stored state water project, water stored in Kern River Bank, in exchange for water being pumped at the Delta to serve, let me look who's it serving. Pardon me, got to think who's going to. I'll have to get back to you. I'm trying
That's
to think
okay,
who's
though.
serving.
I mean, that's a lot of
Got the
detail.
shape of it,
Yeah, I
yeah.
got the idea.
Contra Costa, I'm sorry, it was Contra Costa. I apologize. We are also preparing the statewide notice of potential curtailment this week. It will be likely going out. This notice is a heads up for people to plan ahead as we did last year. It includes the instructions to make sure that they access our drought webpage and also sign up for our LIRIS noticing of the noticing process so that they can get real-time information. And additional information on the notice includes our complaint process and the website access for the complaints. We continue to do QA/QC of diversion demand data, and that is meeting with stakeholders and also improving our data, because we are using 2013 data that we've gotten in now, and we're looking at that as well. So we're getting more data. We're doing more QA/QC for the curtailment analysis. And then we have ongoing enforcement cases.
You do, okay.
I wanted to give you an idea of the activity from last year to this year. As you know, the Delta That's the project temporary urgency changes. We had one order and 18 revisions, or 8 revisions. Other TUCs and transfers, there were 17 issued and 27 this year. Now, that encompasses 53 petitions last year and 88 petitions in 2014. Emergency regulations for water rights, we adopted 2, the curtailment regulation and the fishery protection regulations. Water rights receiving orders of curtailments, that were the 2 orders in Deer Creek, so that affects 49 water right holders. Water rights receiving notice of curtailments, 2013 we didn't do it, but 2014 there was 9,500 water rights affected. Complaints received, we've gone from 54 to 172. We're still reevaluating those. Compliance inspections from 187 to over 947 water rights inspected this year compared to last year. And that is not even a full year for the 2014 number. Drought information orders, we've issued one that affects 30 water rights. That's the San Joaquin order. And then notices of cease and desists and ACLs. Last year, 289 cease and desist notices, 41 ACL complaints. This year, 375 notices have been issued, 42 ACLs issued as of 1/14/2015. So that gives you an idea of the increased workload. We are likely going to be faced with the same if drought conditions persist this year.
I have a question on that. First of all, this is great. This is a really helpful slide because I get these questions, and so this will be nice to, when I meet with folks and I'm out on the road. So compliance inspections, could you talk a little bit more about that, specifically with respect to the issue of, for those that filed in response to the notice? I know you were inspecting even if individuals indicated that they were complying, as opposed to those that did not respond. Does this encompass both categories?
Yes, that encompasses the workload that was done by our staff. And it's been told to me that from stakeholders that the field presence that we presented with our resources was a great deterrent for letting people know that we indeed intended to enforce those notices of curtailment. But the number is for both the non-responders and the responders on the notice for the curtailment list.
Could you separate that out? Responders and not versus non-responders?
I can, and can provide you at a later date,
Okay.
yes.
All right, thanks.
Okay, next slide. I wanted to give you an idea of the process for enforcing failure to file for, these are the online reports that we relied on for water availability analysis. So for permits and licenses only, this does not include statements, the number of reports that were due for 2013 reporting was over 12,000, and we received 74% of the reports. For those 373 that we had not received, we issued 373 draft notices of curtailment, draft notices of CDO. They had an opportunity for hearing or complete a task, otherwise a final CDO would be issued. So the next step, final CDO. So 57 out of the 373, 15% failed to take action under the draft CDO. And then after final CDO, an ACL complaint can be issued. We have thus far issued 42 ACL complaints for violation of the CDOs. The difference between the others will be revocations and or ones that have not been able to be served and we need to process serve. So that's the process just for failing to file permit and licensee reports.
All right. So that's just for juniors, or is it also for the seniors?
No, that doesn't include statement holders.
Okay.
And on the 12% of non-filers, I'm assuming you were targeting the larger water users.
Each year, we get deeper and deeper, so these represent 100 acre-feet or greater on the amounts under the water right.
Okay.
The previous year was 200 acre-feet, the year before that was 500 acre-feet, so we keep moving down. So, as you can tell, there's a great deal of water right holders that have less than 100 acre-feet still that have failed to report. The informational order on the San Joaquin, this is the status we are at right now. There's 30 water rights affected, and we received from 6 of those, or 20%, all information. Whether that information produces a basis of right or not, that's not identified here. We got information, but received late, that was a 7%. Incomplete information received, another 40%. Not received at all. So 20% of the people that we asked for information did not send it in, and then, but they have to be remailed. Those are the ones that probably have to be served by process servers. And then the last one is no response at all, 13%. So we are actively preparing enforcement on this at this time.
Have you let Mr. O'Laughlin know this? Because this is usually a question that he asks.
Well, we can let him know we're working on it, as I've been telling him in the past. And as you can see, we have been doing other enforcement actions, but they take time to develop.
Right.
And then that's all I have for this presentation. If you have any questions?
I do. On the informational order, incomplete information received, that's pretty high, 40%. So is there just confusion out there? What can be done to help people along so that once they, if they're intending on complying, to get them in a position so that it is a complete response?
This has always been a problem with complaints and the process. We get people claiming a right that they are aware of, but they don't have any of the background information to support, like a year of first use and continued beneficial use of a pre-14 right. The riparian claim, if it's detached, how do they asserting a riparian claim to a parcel that is now detached? They need to have some deeded information that supports that a riparian status was reserved through parcel subdivision. That's the kind of information that we do not get, and if we have to produce that, it takes even more time. Then
Sometimes you've found it for people.
Yeah, we try to, in our analysis, if we can get that information, we determine it, but as a claimant of a water right, you should be able to have that information available to prove up on your right. After all these rights are claimed unless they've been adjudicated.
Right. People don't realize that,
Right.
but that is true.
And then the diversion information, some people may give rough estimates and they say we don't know exactly what we divert.
Well, thanks. In an earlier report, you mentioned that you received some support from the regional board staff, because that was a big jump from 2013 to 2014 compliance inspections. Is that
Absolutely. We received assistance from the Department of Water Resources and the regional board staff. That's why we were able to bump up those inspection numbers and make a field presence. Their assistance was of extreme value. And as I said, stakeholders suggested that presence served as a deterrent.
Good. Well, we really want to acknowledge that, the assistance we've received, and not just in word, but in, other ways we can acknowledge. Looking at Tom, just that to the extent that, it's not just charity out there. We want to, recognize the sacrifices they've made.
Yes, Pamela and I discussed that several times. Tangible forms of appreciation.
Good. I'm glad those
She's
conversations.
always on it. It's good.
It's good that those conversations are occurring. Thank you.
Chair Marcus and members, I want to just temper the bullet that John had up there on the dry year assessment. We received a lot of comment, as you all saw. Yes, Felicia has a binder with all the comments. And so as we move into 2015 now, we're taking things in chunks because
That's
we only
smart.
have so much capacity.
Right.
And this first chunk is the curtailment process itself. So the report that's going to be coming out is going to be focused on the curtailment process, how we conduct our analyses, the data that we use, the process that we use, where we make information available, et cetera. That's not to say we're not looking at all those other comments, but they'll be dealt with as we move forward. We're just, like everyone else, having capacity issues, and we need to be able to manage this.
One thing I would recommend. One thing I would recommend is that there, and this goes to some of the comments that Felicia has made from time to time. Context is everything, and so providing. I mean, how much water has been in this whatever year it is you're looking at? How much water has actually been normally diverted this year, and and then what are we doing in terms of curtailments? Because there's sometimes the media will pick up that there's a 5% or there's a 10% or a 15%, when in fact that's for a particular period of time, not for the whole year, and not, it doesn't reflect what happened prior to the restriction. And so I think it's going to be incredibly, I mean, for example, last year, I think normally, is there a normal? But yeah, one could expect that, maybe there is some amount of water that is fairly regularly expected, but it's not 100%. It's 80%, or it's something like that. But in fact, what actually got delivered was about 50% of the 80%. And so those are very important numbers for people to grasp as they start to evaluate what's going on.
You just raised one of our recommendations, actually, or one of the areas of the report, not speaking to the contract, the project deliveries, but speaking to curtailments in general for a large number of water right holders, our pre-14 and riparian water right holders. We get reports once every 3 years covering the prior 3 years. So being able to provide that context is a bit more difficult because we don't have the information as current. So that's one of the areas we explore in the report.
Good, great. Well, the better we can frame it in a way that, my target used to always be my Aunt Charlotte, that we need to explain everything in a way that Aunt Char would understand, which is someone who didn't finish college but read the paper every day and actually wanted to know. And it's a good test, because we all know so much too. So it just becomes telling the story. So thank you both for that. We could talk to you for much longer, but we're going to move on because we have a heavy afternoon, and I do think we need to be able to take a break. But thank you. But I do have one question. So as I said that, I'm going to take it away. See, just fooled you. Yeah, right. I was somewhere and someone said they had heard reports that there was widespread violation of our curtailment orders. And I said I didn't think that was necessarily true, because you have these enforcement actions going, but that when you went out, you found people who were using other rights or had gotten water from other people. Mr. Howard explained to me when I wanted to make sure I was being accurate, and again, widespread, I guess, would be in the eye of the beholder, that part of our challenge too is that someone can say, I got a transfer from a riparian or a senior pre-14, and they don't have to register their transfers the way a junior would. Do I have that right, Tom? I just want to make sure people this is an education moment.
Yes, you wouldn't get a transfer from riparian.
Oh, right, you couldn't get a transfer from
But
riparian. Sorry, I meant
pre-1914
pre-14.
doesn't need to seek permission from the board or from any other party to execute a transfer.
Right, but so we don't require that they show even a document to show that they got the transfer. They show a document, but then we don't go back and check to see whether that person had a valid right to transfer, right? If you had a fully adjudicated system, I'm not, don't go crazy. That would take 30 years to do, but then this would all be set up and monitored. But in our case, am I answering that question right?
Right, I believe you are. We did not find any widespread violations, and I would ask the person that, or entity giving you that information, I said, well, have they filed a complaint to highlight those violations to us, because that is what that process is
Okay.
for. And then we would investigate those complaints specific to the allegations. As we found a lot of land that was idled. We found groundwater being used in lieu of their water rights. Parties using state and federal contracts in lieu of the post-14 water rights, and then other parties exercising their claimed prior rights. That was the result, most of the findings that we made.
Thank you. To be continued. Yeah. Appreciate it, all the hard work. All right, now is the time for board member reports. Which end wants to start?
I'll be really brief because I gave a report last board meeting on January 6th. So the only thing I'll report on is I attended the Public Policy Institute of California's Managing Drought conference along with Chair Felicia Marcus. And there was a lot of valuable information there shared by different panels, and I won't go into great detail. One of the high points for me was our state climatologist, Mike Anderson, gave a very cogent presentation about the nature of our hydrology, looking back in the 20th century, but also showing pretty clearly that 21st century hydrology is significantly different than 20th century hydrology, and both in terms of the amount of precipitation, when it happens, and the nature of the runoff that results, which is a little bit decoupled, especially in the really dry years that we're experiencing. So rainfall happens in punches, and also trivia, the 2012 was, the water year 2012-2013 was on pace for being the wettest year on record because of a wet December 2012, and then 2013 was the driest year ever observed. So in other words, within the course of one calendar year, we spanned the entire distribution of our historic observations.
Wow.
I'm just quoting our climatologist. So I think, that gives you a little sense of when Felicia and I were appointed in 2012, what we were up against coming into this job, right? And we had a laugh about that. But it's very heartening, I think, just to see the commitment of our administration and our legislature to really address water challenges in our state, and it was great to hear once again from Australia, and important lessons learned and how things might work here in California and what things might not. But it's just really important, I think, for us to stay engaged in these discussions and continue to work closely with our fellow state agencies and in the administration and legislature, and make the Water Action Plan. The governor has sponsored just a document that has meaning, and that within the next few years we accomplish some significant strides toward better and more sustainable water management in California.
Good.
And that's all.
Thank you.
Two quick things. I was able to attend the second out of three stakeholder meetings that our GRAP, Grazing
thank you for
Regulatory
doing that.
Action Program team has scheduled. So I attended the Reading meeting last week, and it was quite a turnout. A lot of concerns were raised, a lot of good questions were raised. I expect that we'll be hearing a lot about this issue, and I'll circle back with the team members and staff. Heard some really good suggestions in terms of potential partnerships and collaborations, and of course some concerns about the stakeholder engagement process. And so I think it was a positive step. It's always, I think, an issue of concerns for our regulated community when we announce we're initiating a regulatory process, and there tends to be a reaction to that kind of phrasing and the context in which it's provided. But I think we've made some good steps forward in terms of reaching out to the stakeholders, working with some of the association groups, and hopefully, as a result of these stakeholder meetings, we'll be identifying some new partners that we can engage in. And then the second thing, I just want to do a shout out to our Division of Drinking Water. You might have seen a press release from the Central Coast Regional Water Board recently announcing regarding the Cambria Emergency Drought Project.
Yeah.
And the executive officers, approving some of the requirements necessary for that emergency water treatment plant to start testing and operation. Well, our Carpinteria, I think, district office staff, they have put a lot of time and effort and work and helped make that possible. So a shout out to them as well.
That's great. That's great. Thank you for doing that as well.
I will be listing, I did a lot of outreach in the last 2 weeks, but I'll list that on my website that I now know about, that's on our webpage. Yes, we all have a website. Yes. I just found it like 2 weeks ago. But I want to follow up on Tam's comment about drinking water. I have gone to visit all the offices in Southern California of the drinking water program and have been incredibly impressed. But I'm also finding opportunities to invite the staff from those drinking water programs to some stakeholder meetings as well as to meetings with regional boards, and I'm finding that they contribute hugely to the conversation because they have a special knowledge about drinking water. Now, we have drinking water often in our basin plans, but the Division of Drinking Water staff know about the wells and know the details sometimes more than our staff do. And so I want to encourage all my fellow board members to think in terms of engaging. Now, they too have a work overload and can't come to everything, but it's extremely important that they know about these things. And just recently in Southern California, in Los Angeles, we were dealing with a Superfund site, and it was the contribution of both the regional board but also the Division of Drinking Water in that area that were the standout activities that the environmental justice community appreciated, and so did US EPA and others. So I just want to encourage us and staff to think in terms of how do we make sure we mention, even if they're not physically there, as we just heard with CV salts. That's all about drinking water, a lot of it, or at least half of it's about drinking water. And so we need to say Division of Drinking Water, we need to acknowledge those participants. Thank you.
That's great. That's part of the synergy. Really good reminder.
Okay, so last week I was in Tahoe for Region 6's climate change workshop, and it was a good opportunity to hear from folks locally, and it's interesting that we had breakout sessions, and just the desire to focus on our conservation regulation and what more can be done in the context of climate change. So I thought that was real interesting, and a lot of the other groups were focused as well on conservation. Kind of a disappointing thing, I also attended the Region 6's regularly scheduled board meeting, and really hit home on the impacts of climate change with respect to the ski industry. And heard a presentation, an adaptation strategy actually by Heavenly, and I know Squaw Valley's doing something similar. I see Executive Officer here from Region 6, and just switching over to a summertime strategy, for recreation. And so that in conjunction with being there for the climate change workshop. And then I also sat in, or I watched from the web, the PPIC presentation on climate change. So it's just really hitting home that we're in this for good, and people have to be creative, you know, in every walk of life. I last week was out with our new water master, spending some time on the Delta, looking at the issue of metering and diversions and discharges, pumping, and how all of these issues are present quite a bit of challenges and are all interrelated with the discussions that we've been having on Delta diversions. So it's always nice to get to know new folks in the Delta, and so we met with a couple of farmers who drove us around, and it was a very good discussion. Continuing to still do presentations on groundwater, and so I'll just list them quickly here. The Almond Board, Ag Council, Partnership for the San Joaquin Valley, and in part, I was a speaker at the Yosemite Sustainability Conference and focused in part on groundwater in that presentation. And I have to ditto Board Member Dodek's comments about GRAP. Really starting to spend, I appreciate that you're spending time out in the stakeholder meetings. I'm not able to attend any of those. I was in the sort of the pre-planning ones. But definitely word is out that we've made up our minds. And so really spending a lot of time with the stakeholders to give them the assurances that we are in listening mode, not decision mode just yet, and no decisions have been made that there would be a program at all. So I have really encouraged, and saying this for those that are listening out there, have really encouraged my friends in the ag community because in many instances they're really wanting to just focus on whether or not there's a problem at all. So obviously step one is to determine, you know, what is the need, make sure we have, you know, good, robust information on the science, but also for those in the ag community think that they're doing a pretty good job. What can be done to make sure that everyone's doing a good job, and what ideas do they have that they could put forth? So I'm hoping that they will be much more engaged in that aspect. And that's it.
Oh, that's all great. Thank you. Just a few things to add to that. The PPIC conference was really quite good, and I think they have video of it online. So if people want to see all or part of it, they still can. I wanted to mention just a couple other things, because there's some follow-up that we may need to do. One is I spoke with Michael and Andy's help with a group of water law judges from across the West on a two-part webinar. We did part last week, and I spoke. Next week, we'll continue it with me on, I guess, for questions and discussion, but not a presentation. And in going, the first one focused on California, Idaho, and Nevada. The next one will be Utah and Texas, I think. And we're doing comparative drought response and comparative rules, and they're not all the same other than us. I mean, one thing that ones so far, and I know the next ones to come, have in common is they have much better information than we do on which to base their decision. They also have more rigorous regulation, the adjudications, et cetera. So it's just interesting to talk to them. I mean, we're doing a bunch of stuff too that's very good, but just the difference between the systems is, I think, maybe worthy of taking note, and maybe doing a comparison ourselves to share with the board members. The other thing was that I went to see the zero net energy use, zero net water use home that KB Homes has as a pilot. Have you been up there yet?
I've been to the one in...
Oh, Lancaster?
In Lancaster.
Oh, you went to that one. Yeah, there's one down there too, and there's going to be more, including Pomona's coming up at some point with support from Metropolitan Water District. It's interesting, and I just encourage people to go on future tours, because what they're trying to demonstrate there is a gray water system that also helps with energy, and it separates the shower, washing machine, and bathroom sink, I think. Maybe it's the non-food bearing water. And that not only do they take it out and put it through a treatment system with UV and a filter, they capture the warmth, because that's warm water, and shoot it back to the hot water heater, and it cuts the amount of energy you use in the hot water heater by 75%. So it's this more of a full cycle look at a water energy approach, and there's a lot more to it, but it's just really interesting to see. And one of the things I would love to have as a result, if someone can pull it together, Fran can probably do it in her head, but I think we all just need to know is what the state of statewide regulation and facilitation of gray water is, because you can envision this distributed system that reduces the amount of water needed through distributed use for landscaping and toilet flushing on a smaller scale. That is a really important piece of the future water puzzle. There's pros and cons between centralized everything for control purposes and what you can safely do in a gray water context. They've done a lot of this in Australia, and I asked them to give us a summary of the long-term efforts and how they regulate it in Australia. It doesn't mean we would do it exactly the same way, but experience is helpful. But I definitely think this is an area where we have to think about it, and it's regulated in so many different places that just a matrix or cheat sheet would be really helpful.
Well, and also I would say differentiate between the Bay Area, San Francisco area, where they have limited the access to gray water systems to agencies or to businesses, not residential. This is a residential one that you're talking about. And so it makes, to some extent, it makes a difference. And on this one, there's some new regulations for gray water that were adopted by the plumbing code people
I can't remember
back in January of last year.
Yeah.
And so this Australian firm is the first firm to go through the permitting process to be certified under that new regulatory scheme. They haven't. They're still waiting for all the results from the lab and that sort of thing. They had to build a lab to actually do the testing, and so we're at the beginning. But it is very popular, and the legislature is quite interested, and the Paula Daniels from LA has been working with the OPR, with the Office of Planning and Research, on gray water. So it might be worth certainly having a small seminar, if you will, on this for all of us at some point in the fairly near future.
Yeah, we may need to have a conversation. Apparently there's some conflicts, maybe too strong a word, but you have Title 22 and then you have this plumbing code, and so getting the people together who operate both to be able to talk with each other would be good. Ideally, they would like this to substitute for Title 22 compliance, because Title 22, which is envisioned in public agencies doing this work, requires an amount of monitoring that a homeowner could never do. So you'd want to, again, in the future, we'll have a menu of options perhaps, but so there might be some resolution that we need to come to, but.
Yeah, and even though we're not talking about drinking water,
We are not.
our division of drinking water is kind of where our in-house expertise is
Correct.
on this.
So they would be the ones that these folks would like to talk to.
Yeah. In the end, it's probably makes sense for us to, show some leadership by bringing in our expertise there. All due respect to the folks who worked on the plumbing code, but it is a water quality issue.
Right.
So it's just something I'd be really excited to support in any way, in terms of forwarding gray water. It seems like the time's right. It's great to hear you all discuss it.
Good, okay, great. Thank you for that. Executive Director's Report. It's thorough and amazing, as always. It's inspiring to see all the work that
yes,
goes
it
on,
is.
because it doesn't all come to the board for things. I mean, there are hundreds of people doing amazing work in the agency that, or in the board, who we don't get to see out here, but I always find it pretty darn amazing.
Yes, it is inspiring, and I encourage everyone to read it. But I didn't have anything I wanted to specifically call out today, and so that concludes my comments.
Let me just say, I really appreciate the table at the start from the Division of Water Quality with the reports on the priority project, actually the projects and the status. That is very helpful.
Yes, and it shows that while 2015, there's a lot of exciting things coming, as you say, Chair Marcus.
2015, 16 are going to be an e-ticket
Look,
ride.
look at the water quality docket.
Yeah, right.
It's nothing. It's significant, and thanks to staff for committing, all the work up to now. And I mean, there's a ton of work that's gone into this. So if we can do it, that's amazing.
Great. We will recess until 1 o'clock. Yeah.